Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pipeline Fighters Hub webinar, State of the States on Carbon Dioxide CO2 Pipelines. My name is Mark Hefflinger. I'm the Digital and Communications Director for the BOLD Alliance, which includes BOLD, Nebraska, which is known for working to stop Keystone XL pipeline. We also launched the Pipeline Fighters Hub, which aims to help connect local communities also working to stop risky fossil fuel projects and pipelines in their communities. And tonight we're going to be talking about the states that are impacted by this new flurry of carbon dioxide pipelines and the bills that are being introduced at state legislatures. We got folks here tonight from Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Illinois, who are going to give us kind of an overview of what's happening in their state legislatures, the organizing that's happening on the ground in the counties, which are passing ordinances and moratoria on CO2 pipelines, and also some of the stuff that's happening at the state agencies. Some states have processes that will govern permitting for these pipelines, and we're going to talk to all of these folks and hear what's going on in the states. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll give it another minute here so we can get everyone who has registered to jump online. Just a reminder, if during the webinar you have a question at all, you can click the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and type a question. We'll get to them at the end. Also, we have a chat, and you are able to type your question into the chat, and Panos will see that, and we can get to those towards the end as well. So, without any further ado, I'd like to just go ahead and do a quick introduction of all the panelists, and then we'll do a kind of go around and get state-by-state updates. So with us tonight, once again, I'm Mark Hefflinger. I work with BOLD Nebraska out of Nebraska and the Pipeline Fighters Hub. Jane Klebb was supposed to join us tonight. She is had a flight delay coming home from Chicago, so she will not be able to join us, unfortunately. But we have with us Shelly Meyer, who is a landowner. Her family is affected by one of these carbon pipelines, and she will be giving us the Nebraska-based update for this evening. Also with us tonight is Elliot Huggins. He is an organizer with the Dakota Resource Council and the North Dakota easement team. We've got Chase Jensen, who is in South Dakota with the South Dakota easement team, Dakota Rural Action. We've got Pam Richard, who is with Coalition Stop CO2 Pipelines and in Illinois. We've got Maggie Shepard, they're in Minnesota and with an organization called CURE, Clean Up Our River Environment. And also a special guest, should we need him for Q&A or any updates on legal stuff, is attorney Paul Blackburn, who is with the BOLD Alliance, one of our colleagues here. So welcome everyone, and we have decided to go with alphabet style organizing here with the last names of the organizer. So Elliot, that will be you. We're going to hear what's happening in North Dakota. Go ahead, Elliot.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark, for the warm introduction. Definitely appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here today. Yeah, it's great. I know there's already so much going on in our own states, and it's a little overwhelming to try to navigate all 5 states, I know for folks. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity for all of us to come together in one place to be able to share all this information. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and like Mark said, my name's Elliot. I'm an organizer with Dakota Resource Council. And yeah, a lot of my work is on the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline and landowner rights, county ordinances, legislature, all that good stuff. Yeah, just gonna be talking a little bit about some of the work we've done here in North Dakota up to this point, and looking forward in the future where we're going to be at. So yeah, I just want to start things off here. Question I get from a lot of folks in North Dakota, is this pipeline inevitable? Is this project inevitable? And why I was so happy to have the opportunity to speak here at this webinar and have all of us share this information is I really want people to know there's a lot of really, really awesome, amazing groups and people and landowners and farmers working on this outside of whatever state you reside in. Yeah, so please just know, this isn't just a North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, or Minnesota issue. there's people working on all of this. So just be aware of that. And know there's a lot of community on this issue. In North Dakota, I'll just start off right off the bat here and talk about some of our the bills that were in our last legislative session. So we had 8 bills that were introduced that related in various ways to CO2 pipelines, and namely the Summit Carbon Solutions project. Some examples of kind of what those bills entailed. Legislation that would either, set a threshold of 85% or higher to use eminent domain. Another big bill, our big bill was, no eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, period. We had, some legislation around public hearings before being granted common carrier status, which means having the right to eminent domain in North Dakota, allowing more public input before that right's granted. We also have the CO2 storage issue in North Dakota, where all the CO2 from the Summit pipeline is going to be stored underground. So we had some pore space, some amalgamation bills and things like that. Then we also had a bill that dealt with survey access, limiting when pipeline companies and things like that can enter your property without your permission, and really making clear that it needs to be a public use. A court order is going to be necessary if a landowner, for whatever reason, wants to enact their private property right. Admittedly, in North Dakota, it's a tough crowd up there. I was really, really, really proud of our landowner group, even just affected citizens throughout the state. I think folks put in a really good effort to do as much as they could. But unfortunately, things didn't exactly go our way in the Senate and Natural Resources Committee a couple weeks ago. Most bills in the committee, unfortunately, got a do not pass recommendation. I'll just share the main eminent domain bill we were working on to protect private property rights from these projects. It was a 2-4 vote in the committee, and then unfortunately it was a 11-36 vote in the committee. But I really think talking to legislatures and lots of people who have been involved with these issues for a long time, lobbyists at the Capitol were almost, they're at an unprecedented rate. Coal, ethanol, oil, state agencies. And so the fact, we're able to come together and make a big case, even with all that, institutional opposition. I was just really, really proud of folks. Some, I guess, a little bit of good news that came out of that process. We were able to pass a survey bill, 46-1 in the state Senate. And what that bill does is it says basically a company or government entity could only survey on your private property with written permission, or a court order stating the survey on the property is necessary for public use. I know a lot of states have bad survey policies. I'm sure a lot of your states do. I know some other states all they have to do is mail you a letter. To me, that's ridiculous, quite frankly. It wasn't our big keystone bill, but I really think it's a good piece of legislation that helps us get some better private property rights. Moving on just real quickly to some of the county commissions processes. So in states like Iowa, for example, I know county commissions can submit written objections to various aspects of the project. I know eminent domain was a really common thing for that. In South Dakota, I know on the online docket, there's ways for people to leave their comments and feedback. North Dakota, we unfortunately don't have any of that public process. It's really, really unfortunate. It's really limited here. So some of the work last spring was, when we were kind of getting organized and strategizing, we were able to get 6 resolutions passed statewide by county commissions opposing eminent domain. Not binding, not, the end all be all, but that was a really, really good start. And a really, really good, it's going to be a really, really good signal here to our Public Service Commission proceedings here in a couple of weeks. The past few months, building on that momentum, we've been working really hard to pass county ordinances. Trying to engage our county officials as much as they'll, listen to us and be receptive. So after in Emmons County, North Dakota, after a long process, 2 public hearings, very recently we passed a setback ordinance for any hazardous pipelines within the county must be located 2 miles from city limits and 1.5 miles from any inhabited structure. And even just setback ordinances like that, I'd really, really encourage everyone to do to get some better protections to your communities. Burleigh County, we're working on 2 concurrent ordinances right now. We're getting to the end of that process. I'm really hopefully optimistic in a couple of weeks here we'll have an ordinance. One ordinance is from the county commission. process. One is going through the planning and zoning department process. That ordinance relates to setbacks, reclamation requirements, emergency response plans, permit and usage fees. It's very, very similar to the Shelby County, Iowa ordinance, just things a little bit tailored to here in North Dakota. We've had one public hearing on the county commission ordinance, 2 public hearings on March 8th and 15th on the planning and zoning ordinance. Once after March 15th, once we have those public hearings, the county commission will meet one more time to consider both ordinances and hopefully pass them. So I'd encourage everybody to, get involved, get engaged. I found the more people you can get there, the more information you present, the more receptive they are. And so, yeah, it would be the first ever ordinance under the city of Bismarck's home rule charter, which I think is a really exciting opportunity. And look forward to working with anyone on the call statewide in North Dakota. If your county wants to work on something, just reach out and let me know. So yeah, thanks so much, everybody. I definitely really appreciate it. And yeah, happy to answer any questions later. Thanks so much.
I had a follow-up. Elliot, can you talk a little bit about the Public Service Commission? I think they have some hearings coming up. Maybe give the dates and talk a little bit about what's coming up on that front.
Yeah, good point, Mark. Yeah, good point. So yeah, our Public Service Commission in North Dakota recently set 4 public hearings for the Summit pipeline process. And as I kind of explained earlier in the call, I know, say for Iowa for example, they have to hold public meetings before seeking easements. I know, Chase, in South Dakota, there were several public meetings last spring. We don't get that. The official public hearing is the one chance you get to make your case. And so those are coming up really, really important. Our first one's gonna be March 14th. The second one's March 28th. The third one's April 11th. And the fourth one is May 9th. And those are very, very spread out all throughout the 339-ish miles in North Dakota. So yeah, I'd highly recommend attending those. We're actually in the process of we actually submitted a petition to try to get a 5th hearing in Dickey County. And landowners actually just responded to the PSC's request for more information on that. So I'm really, really hopefully optimistic we'll get a 5th county hearing there as well.
Great, thanks for that. And landowners are directly intervening in North Dakota in these hearings to represent themselves and have attorneys and whatnot, like some of the other states. That's right. Yes, absolutely. And if anyone's on the call, I would definitely recommend checking out northdakotaeasement.org with attorney Brian Jordy. It's going to be representing a group of North Dakota landowners at the PSC. I highly recommend, if you're waiting to do it now, because those hearings are really going to come up. To your point, Mark, yeah, I'm sure. I know there will be some other private attorneys intervening as well. And yeah, we're gonna make a really best strong case we can. And I anticipate those hearings being 12, 15 hours long. I really do. Yep. It'll be great to hear all of the back and forth there. And I know that the North Dakota PSC will be streaming those. And if not, we will definitely, the network of folks here will be able to make sure that those are available. So we can see that and hear all the pipeline companies' arguments, because that'll be kind of the first one that's coming through the pike, so to speak, in terms of the states that are on deck to have these state agency processes. I think that's due to North Dakota statute and the timeline that's set there. Yep. North Dakota likes to move very, 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 very fast on any project. I've learned doing this work. Wheels have been greased for fossil fuel extraction, especially. Very much so. Very much so. Well, thanks so much, Elliot. Great update. And moving just a bit south in Dakotas, can I turn it over to Chase Jensen, who is with the South Dakota easement team on the Dakota election. Go ahead, Chase.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and hello, everybody. I usually don't dress this nice to sit in my car for webinars, but I'm caught between meetings today, so glad to be here. And we're grateful for all of you for taking the time this evening. Like Mark said, I am located in South Dakota, and we, like all these other states, did not solicit these carbon pipelines, but have found ourselves in the eye of a hurricane nonetheless. So we have been busy at work, running around, trying to respond, trying to get organized, and I'll share a couple different aspects of the organizing that's been done here in the state. So I'll start off with a update on the legislative session, which has 2 weeks left in South Dakota, 9-week session. And unfortunately, at this point, our legislative efforts were stymied. We ended up having 10 bills introduced, which was pretty remarkable. Those were consolidated down to 7 bills between the bill sponsors, and then 6 of those had hearings on the same day. So after about 6.5 hours of hearings in our House State Affair Committee, 2 of them escaped. They both ended up passing the House floor, which was incredible. It's the first time that substantive eminent domain legislation has passed a chamber in almost 20 years in South Dakota. So nothing to, look down upon with the efforts. We always knew that the Senate was going to be the tougher of the 2 chambers to pass. And when our bills went forward to their Senate committee, it was put to a committee that was stacked with folks opposed to the projects and some of the main power brokers in our Senate who were representing parts of establishment that were opposed to these projects. Like in North Dakota, we saw a flurry of corporate lobbying. I think at one point I was getting texts and calls. There was over 20 lobbyists, lawyers, professional lobbyists, folks who know what they're doing a whole lot better than I do when I walk around with a lobbyist badge, walking around the floor and lobbying all the representatives before a House floor vote. That was very discouraging. But at the same time, we had over 150 people show up on the day of that 6.5 hour hearing. We packed the room, the biggest hearing room in the Capitol, and had excellent testimony. I see in the participant list a handful of folks who were there who testified and really did just a tremendous job. We had Attorney Brian Jordy, who represents hundreds of folks here in South Dakota in the South Dakota easement team. He was present in the hearing and also did a tremendous job and helped get a few of those bills out and through the House. We are just keeping our eyes open in case anything is switched around. In South Dakota, we call it a hog house when a bill is amended to the point of basically clicking, control, all, delete, and then copy paste something completely different. That's a hog house, and it happens frequently. So we're still keeping our eyes open and watching dirty tactics like that. But at this point, we are pretty much have wrapped up our 2023 legislative efforts. I was just writing a newsletter update for Dakota Rural Action and was commenting on the tenet of cold anger that gets brought up in the realm of community organizing, of organizing on these social issues. And I think it's worth naming that in this space. I was raised, and when we talk around anger, it's, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Anger is seen as a bad thing, and there certainly is a negative type of anger. But cold anger that we describe in the field of organizing, doing this type of social engagement, is when you're pressed up against injustice, mistreatment of people, and rather than being real hot and frustrated and freaking out, rather than getting so upset and disappointed, you just stop doing anything. Cold anger is when that injustice, the irk down inside of us, is transformed into a long-lasting renewable energy source that can be drawn upon with endurance for the long haul. While we didn't come out of the legislative session with any legislative victories, I would say that the cold anger of the way people were mistreated and disrespected in the session by some of our legislators and by the process that unfolded is a tremendous victory that we will be carrying forward back into our county organizing. At the county level now, we are coming back with all cylinders firing. and have seen some very encouraging movement just in recent weeks that's really helping lift our spirits and get us pushing in that momentum again. Real early on, when these pipelines came out, we had a big push for folks to join the South Dakota easement team, to establish a legal cooperative that could engage in the legal and permitting procedures related to the pipelines. We also made a really early push to get counties to take action, which I'm sure will be a recurring theme this evening. We ended up, from last year's works, having 5 counties pass moratoriums on hazardous CO2 pipelines, which was because nobody was ready to write an ordinance on these brand new to South Dakota projects that are not at all referenced or zoned. There's no ordinances around these in the state. So since nobody was ready to do that yet, there was a push for moratoriums so that there was time for planning and zoning boards to develop those ordinances. We also had 16 of 18 counties impacted by Summit make official motions to intervene in the Public Utility Commission process, which was tremendous. One of those has since dropped out. And then I believe 2 of the numbers are off in my head, but a handful of the navigator counties, there's only 4 or 5 across there, also intervened. So we had some really good efforts, but just in these last few weeks, Lincoln County and Minnehaha County represent the largest counties in the state, or in East River, being impacted by these pipelines by population. And so we've looked to them for action, seeking them to take action so that perhaps some of the smaller counties would follow along that haven't already taken the lead of many of the rural counties which were quick to take action. Lincoln County, which covers part of Sioux Falls, just recently had a 4-0 vote in a resolution that is legally non-binding. It was encouraging that the commission voted to approve this resolution that encouraged Summit and Navigator to avoid the use of eminent domain and instead to work out easement negotiations with landowners without that eminent domain being utilized. So we were glad to see that. We would like to see stronger action taken, but that was a good step. And it was especially a good step alongside a very exciting 6-0 vote, unanimous vote by the Lincoln County Planning and Zoning Board to recommend a comprehensive ordinance, CO2 pipeline ordinance, to the full county commission, which will probably happen in maybe 2 meetings out from now. So this was an ordinance that landowners developed, worked on with lawyers, and brought forward, had to pay an application fee to the county to submit a proposed ordinance change because the county wouldn't act. And because of the pressure and the 50 people who showed up during a blizzard at the committee meeting this last week, had that 6-0 vote. So that was a huge move, and we're hoping to roll it into further action. And I'm currently sitting outside the Minnehaha public building where we're going to have another planning and zoning meeting tonight. So those were some really big moves that have been happening, and we expect to continue pushing that out to more and more counties that are interested in reaching out to our group to ask about those ordinances now that one county has this on the books. The last things I'll say here are that I've mentioned our Public Utility Commission process. And so we have 3 public utility commissioners on our board who are going to be voting on the permitting process. And South Dakota is different than some of the other states in that, for example, Iowa, companies have to apply for a permit for their project. They also have to apply for the use of eminent domain. And as I understand, there's an actual process that's initiated for that. In South Dakota, we only have a permitting process. The way our law is written is that any common carrier that receives a permit from the PUC has the power assumed of eminent domain. It's assumed that. And so they don't have to initiate any process saying, hey, we're a private company seeking to take private land for private profit, and we should be able to do that. They just get to do it if they check all the boxes of permitting that the PUC requires. And so we ended up with our big push to have folks intervene. We ended up having over 450 intervener applications for the Summit project. I don't have the number off the top of my head for the Navigator, but the previous record, if we'll call it, was around 200 and some with Keystone XL. So over double the number of people who intervened, which was just tremendous. And again, 16 of the 18 counties initially intervened as well. So we have a strong block of landowners who have shared legal representation, and a few other smaller groups that also got lawyers together and are involved, who are present and are pushing the fight forward within that permitting process. We also, well, I'll say on that point, we have a rule here, which is you have from the time the PUC receives a permit application, they have 12 months to the day to give a decision on that. Summit asked for an extension, and that was granted, actually an indefinite extension, because as many of you probably have experienced, it was a incomplete, terrible application with horrible maps that a 6-year-old could have done better on, that didn't have north marked, just egregious errors in the application. So they are now slated for a September 2023 hearing timeline. And even though Navigator applied second for their permit, they never asked for an extension. And so they are actually the first that will receive a hearing from the PUC in June this year. So that is rapidly approaching. And then the final piece would be just the legal side of this. There was tons and tons of landowners sued by Summit because they refused to survey. A few years ago, South Dakota passed a really terrible law that any company with an active permit application at the PUC could forcibly survey against landowners' consent if they give a 30-day written notice, and not fleshed out a whole lot more than that. So people may not have gotten it, may not have signed the registered letter or verified mail, and the process is just unfolding. So the South Dakota easement team with Brian Jordy are representing groups of landowners. Our counties have banded those together. So tomorrow, Brian Jordy will be up here in South Dakota representing landowners from 2 counties whose lawsuits have been combined into one hearing. And we are fighting that on that end, and also fighting against the constitutionality of that project, because we believe that that 30-day notice of surveying is the use of eminent domain, even before they have a permit. So we are strong at it at every angle: legal, permitting, legislative, county zoning. And I would say that right now, having just kind of lost our legislative efforts, the big push for us is to come back together, kind of regroup. What happened? Let's learn the lessons, learn the insights from the experiences we've had, and then even more than we have been, get organized, get together, get strategic, and figure out where we can move forward and then hammer at it. So that is South Dakota.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chase. That was a great, very informative update. I'm trying to remember, are there active lawsuits against some of the counties who have taken action in South Dakota as well? That was one thing I was gonna.
Yes, there are. When the projects first came out, the lawyer for Summit, along with their registered lobbyist, who at the time was also the chairman of the GOP in the state, which is the supermajority here, was going around county to county and threatening lawsuits if counties did anything. And of course, counties have the right legal authority to do things, so they have, and subsequently have been sued by Summit. I think all 5 of the counties that have taken action have been sued, and those are still in process. So definitely an attempt to intimidate other counties from taking action. And we're still pushing for them to do that, but there is a little bit of a holdup when people want to see how that shakes out first. So that's a big part of the nuance of it all.
Yep, and I think that is playing out in some of these other states. It's one of the Big Oil's playbook. If counties want to put common sense protections in place, they threaten to sue throughout the whole process and then eventually do. We'll see if they're on as firm legal grounding as they believe that they are in terms of preemption. We've devoted some previous pipeline fire sub webinars to that topic, and maybe at the end of this we can have Paul Blackburn, the attorney, come on and just kind of give us a tie in the bow on what's happening with those lawsuits. But in the meantime, let us travel a little bit southeast to Iowa, and I'd like to welcome Jessica Mazur from the Iowa Sierra Club.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for attending today. I'm going to kind of give you an Iowa update. Like many of the other states, we have lots of different strategies that we're working on to stop the pipelines. So I'm going to go over a lot of those, but specifically what we're doing up at the State House right now. So I've got a little presentation to share with you. In Iowa, we have the Iowa Utilities Board process to go through in order for a pipeline, a hazardous liquid materials pipeline, to get a permit and to get the right to use eminent domain. And that's the Iowa Utilities Board, or the IUB. It's a 3-member appointed board by the governor. And the 3 members are listed here: Jerry Huser, Richard Leger, and Josh Burns. However, some of those terms are up. We might see some changes before hearings on who those members are. And then the general process that these pipelines have to go through is they have to notify people and hold these informational meetings. Then they can start trying to survey people's land, and the land agents from the pipeline companies start putting their pressure on to get easements. And at a certain point, the company will actually file an application. And once that application has been filed for, they'll develop a schedule for the hearings and for the procedural process. And eventually we'll have a final hearing and a final decision. And then I'm assuming with this one, no matter which way they go, there's going to be appeals. So in Iowa, where we're at is we've got 3 pipelines, 3 carbon pipelines being proposed. Summit applied first. They applied in January of 2022. All of these companies initiated the process before they applied. I'm starting with their application date. So they applied in January of 2022. Summit's the first pipeline company to get a hearing schedule, which we will be pushing back on to try to delay that even more. They were originally hoping to have their schedule or their final hearing in October of last year, and clearly October of last year passed, never happened. We've delayed them a whole year. Right now it's October 2023 through January 2024 is the tentative hearing date, so multi-month hearing process. But what we do know with Summit, because they have been filing the easements that they have and that they don't have, is they still have 1,090 unsigned parcels, which just shows the level of opposition to that pipeline. And the level of opposition to Navigator and Wolf is even higher because they have the advantage of knowing more once they find out about those pipelines. Navigator is the second one that applied. They applied in October of 2022. They don't have a hearing schedule yet, and they are not filing any of their easement agreements with the state. So we don't know how many they have, but what we're hearing from landowners impacted is that we're doing even better on Navigator's route. And then Wolf is the third one. It just applied last week. And same thing, we don't have an idea of how far along they are with easements. We don't have a schedule for them or anything, but landowners are already organizing on that route as well. Over the past year and a half, we've accomplished quite a bit. So I'm going to just quickly kind of run through that because it shows just all the different strategies we're using. But we're working on county ordinances. And so far, Shelby and Story County have passed ordinances that have setbacks and conditional use permits and a lot of other protections in them. And we know of at least 12 other counties in the state that are somewhere in the process of passing these ordinances. We've also been asking counties to object formally with the Iowa Utilities Board. And so far, of the 56 impacted counties in the state, 44 of them have formally objected. So 78% of counties have formally objected, mostly to the use of eminent domain. Some of the objections go even farther than that, but objecting to the use of eminent domain for a private project. We've also gotten 7 counties to formally intervene into the Iowa Utilities Board process, and we'll be continuing to ask counties to do that. The list is always growing, but 7 so far have actually intervened with the Iowa Utilities Board, saying that they want to participate in this whole hearing process. We've also been focusing on 22 towns and cities that have objected and more, growing constantly. A lot of these cities and towns are ones that have the pipeline near them, next to their school districts or next to their hospitals. So we've been working with local entities to try to get them to object as well, to build the broadest coalition that we can here in the state. And then beyond city councils, we've been working with school districts, boards of health, development corporations, conservation boards, the parties, whether Republican, Democrat, Libertarian Party, all coming together to say, we do not want these projects at all. And then the landowners clearly have a huge part of this in Iowa. And so they have unified and decided to hire the same lawyer as some of the other states. Obviously, we have the Iowa easement team here in Iowa with Brian Jordy from Domina Law Group. There's hundreds of landowners that have signed up along the 3 pipeline routes. And then we can kind of see how we're doing on the Summit route. These are maps that have been filed with the state of Iowa of Summit. This is Hardin County. The person who owns Summit is Bruce Rastetter. Bruce Rastetter lives right around up here. This is his hometown, and you can see the red means they haven't signed. So his own neighbors aren't signing easements for the pipeline. This is Bruce Rastetter, owner of Summit's own county. And then this is Franklin County, just north of Hardin County. Red, again, is unsigned parcels. These landowners are saying no way. And then we also have Story County saying no. This is the county that's also impacted by Navigator, so I'm assuming we'll be very strong in there as well. Kossuth County up north. And it goes on and on and on across the state of just counties that are showing really strong opposition. And then we've also been building our coalition beyond landowners, beyond local governments, beyond counties and cities. We've been working with scientists, economists, and environmentalists across the state. And this was one op-ed that they wrote in the newspaper. I'll just read kind of the end. It says, but we can do better than the proposed pipelines. Science indicates that they are poor investments and unlikely to have a meaningful effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So trying to take it on from every angle possible. And then, I guess the other impacted states, you're already going to hear that. I should have taken that slide out of here. Other things that we've been also having to respond to, so that a lot of those things I talked about are us going on the offense, but we've had to defend ourselves against some actions the pipeline companies have done as well. Summit and Navigator have sued over a dozen landowners to gain access to their land. Vicki Holz's trial was the first one that happened in Iowa, and who won that first stage of that trial. And not only did she win that, but we challenged the constitutionality of Iowa's survey law. Vicki is going back to court this next week on March 7th. So we'll have an update on that. But so far, we're really proud that Vicki's been able to hold off Navigator from her land, and it's set good precedent for all the other landowners. And then the bigger question of whether Iowa's survey law is even constitutional, that goes to court on January 2024. Dickinson County has sued Summit employees for trespassing for surveyors. Summit and Navigator have sued Iowa counties. Pipeline companies are using fear-mongering tactics, like saying the ethanol industry is going to die, and a lot more. So we're responding to all of that, and we're doing a really good job at continuing to build our opposition. But now we're in the legislative session. And we have 3 main bills that have been that either our favorite bills or have the most traction. And the first one is Senate File 101 and House File 308. They're our preferred bills. They're simple. They're just an outright ban of eminent domain for carbon pipelines here in Iowa. But those bills are not moving, as we'll see in a minute. We have House File 368. This is our second strongest bill. It's a 90% threshold before eminent domain can be used. It impacts these 3 pipelines, and it has other things like protecting county ordinances, a moratorium until PHMSA regulations, banning construction until permits of all the states have been approved, and a few more things. This bill actually has a hearing tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the House Judiciary Committee. Senate File 346 is our bill we do not like. The Senate decided they think they know better than the landowners what's needed here in the state. They put out a 66% threshold. It doesn't apply to these 3 pipelines, and it brought in a whole other different parties that would be not impacted by these pipelines because it impacted electric transmission lines and a bunch of other things too. That bill, luckily though, we had a subcommittee hearing this morning. We showed up and we killed the bill. It's dead. It's not moving through the Senate. So we're now just down to the 90% threshold, and then hopefully our preferred full bans. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are a bunch of other bills too, like I'm sure in other states, that range from harassment protections to outright bans to county ordinances, investment disclosure, stuff like that. There we go. The status of the bills, here you can see our two preferred bills, other than being assigned to subcommittee, haven't moved. Our second preferred bill is tomorrow at 9 a.m. So anyone that wants to come to the Capitol tomorrow at 9 a.m., you'll be able to watch this bill be debated. Senate File 346, the 66% threshold bill, died in subcommittee today. And then there is another bill that's advancing, but it's just impacts services, doesn't really impact eminent domain. What we've done so far at the Capitol is we've been at the Capitol weekly, sent hundreds of emails and calls, letters to the editor, community or committee meetings, attended forums back home in people's districts, and we've built legislative allies like Iowa Cattlemen's Association, Iowa State Association of Counties, and more. And even last week, we had a 300-person rally to try to pressure our legislators to get a bill passed before an upcoming deadline. So I would say in Iowa, the big picture is that our opposition is continually growing, and it's unprecedented here in the state for any sort of project like this. We have multiple strategies to stop the projects. We're not putting all of our eggs into one basket. And it's working because we're spreading out the resources of these pipeline companies. So all three pipeline companies are really struggling to get easements right now. And counties and local governments are overwhelmingly siding with Iowa landowners, and the landowners are remaining united. They're not folding, and we have a strong group of people who are holding out and not signing easements. So I believe that we have every reason to think we are going to stop all three of these pipelines here in the state. So I'm sure I missed a few things, but there's a lot of updates in Iowa. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jess. In terms of those letters to the editor, I just wanted to put it in the chat, but there's a great one that a landowner named Bonnie Ewell published. It's all over Iowa. It's in the Register today, and really does a great job of refuting the study that the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association put out. It's a in the can study from the industry that says that Chicken Little, sky is falling, ethanol industry is going to die within X number of years. We don't get the CO2 pipelines, which funny based on their other previous years profits and whatnot. But you can take a look at that. Anyway, thank you so much, Jessica. That was a wonderful and very, there's lots happening in Iowa, like you said.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
Moving right along, we are going to now hear, I think we're going to go for Illinois and Pam from the Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines. Can we hear from you, Pam? You are on mute, Pam.
How about that? Thank you. Thanks, Mark, and thank you to all of you for being here this evening. Our update is going to be a lot of replication of some of the things you've heard, but I think some differences as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to start. I'm just going to begin. So first of all, we have two pipelines, unlike Iowa. In Illinois, we're working with Navigator and Wolf. And one of the things that maybe some of you or perhaps all of you on this call know is that on January 20th, Navigator withdrew its application before the Illinois Commerce Commission. They had filed it with the ICC on July 25th, but they didn't have what they needed to have to move forward. They didn't have a designated sequestration site to put their carbon. And so in a nutshell, the ICC said, you know, you got a choice here. And by the way, before the ICC even said anything, we had all kinds of interveners and motions to dismiss the project. But then the ICC staff said, you know, you have an option here. You can withdraw your application voluntarily, or, you know, we might just look at it and eventually deny your project because it's incomplete. So they voluntarily withdrew with a promise to be back in February. And on Friday, they did indeed file again. This time with an additional 44 miles of pipeline heading from Sangamon County into Montgomery County and a second sequestration site in Montgomery County. I want to echo what I've heard as a common narrative this evening, that landowners along these routes do not want the pipeline. I want to say that when Navigator actually released its information to us on easements in December, they had only 6% of the easements they needed signed. So I think that's a testimony here to organizing that's going all across the 5-state area. And folks are not just watching what's happening in Illinois, but they're also watching what's happening in all the other states we're hearing from this evening. Also, I do want to say that what's going on here is rather appalling, and perhaps it's happening in other places. After they withdrew and before they withdrew, actually, they've been hitting the counties along the route, trying to buy them out. And they've been offering some pretty hefty dollars, right? So the counties that we have had the most success working in are holding fast, they're holding firm and saying no. But when you are offered a price, as McDonough County is, for example, of $630,000 a year for 30 years, you kind of sit back and say, huh, right? So far, so good, but we're still working to keep everybody back in the intervention process and not change their minds. ADM, on the other hand, has not filed yet. We're expecting they're going to do this any day. And there is no public process required by the Illinois Commerce Commission that would require ADM to meet with landowners, to give us maps, to hold public meetings, and so there aren't. And so we know very little about what's happening except for that map that you see here. But what we do know by extrapolating a bit from that map, that their alignment includes a spur that goes from the main line that's going to go up Route 24 from Pekin to Peoria and pass along some environmental justice communities. These are folks predominantly of color with low incomes, poor health, and poor quality housing. And the Biourgia plant that's there was a former Hiram Walker distillery. It doesn't belong there. It was on fire last year with an explosion. And I guess what I'm going to say here is watch the EJ component of our campaign as we develop it once ADM files. So one of the things that might be a little bit different about Illinois here is that we're operating from a coalition point of view. So we are part of a larger structure that I'll talk a little bit about at the end, called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, that was responsible for passing groundbreaking legislation in, good heavens, what year is that? 2021, I think. It's still fairly new. And now we're implementing it. So once we heard about the pipelines, and that didn't really happen until we were pretty much finished celebrating the win and the victory we had. We weren't paying attention. These are the folks. We have 9 organizations that have come together in a core group. We make all the strategic decisions. We hold meetings every week for 90 minutes, and we have subgroups, including a communications team that's being developed and groups on Navigator, et cetera, et cetera. But what we did right away was we formed a campaign plan. And so we're like any campaign plan, it's dynamic. You want to revisit to see how it works, right? But our campaign did exactly what I've been hearing folks saying tonight. We got to intervene with the ICC. When we began, we heard that Navigator was going to file with the ICC as soon as March. It didn't happen until July. But we had to do all of our organizing with the timeline in mind, that we had to have intervention in process, because that's what you have to do here in Illinois. So that's prong number 1. Prong number 2 is to push the Army Corps of Engineers to do what they should be doing, which is to do a full evaluation of environmental impacts and not piecemeal it. They should look at the whole alignment and not just little segments of it. And so we're going to be speaking to representatives of the other states to see where we can go to look at, is there a possibility for an EIS here? What can we do to really stop this project? And certainly if we can't stop it, how can we delay it? So that's prong number 2. Prong number 3, we went into rather naively thinking, oh, prong number 3 is not going to really be relevant until Navigator files for its Class 6 permit before the US EPA. Well, let me tell you, prong number 3 has had just as much traction and just as much activity as getting folks to intervene with the ICC. There's lots of activity that I'll talk about that's happening in Illinois, associated not just with ADM Navigator, but also with ADM and also with other industries that is influencing what we're doing and steps we're taking. So I did want to say a little bit about our ICC process, and I think it shares some of the same things that I think I've heard others say. First of all, it was created at the time FutureGen, the major research and development project for carbon capture and storage was proposed. Good heavens, what year was that proposed? So long ago. It was like, it went on for like 13, 14 years before it collapsed because technical difficulties, lack of funding, and inability to meet timelines. But that's why we have this act. It has nothing to do with sequestration. And we were just delighted that the ICC actually said, well, all right, we're not evaluating sequestration, but you got a route to nowhere that nobody can evaluate. Boom, off you go into a different mode until you get your act together. But the problem we have with this act are many. One, it comes right out and says CO2 pipelines in Illinois are for the public good. No need to talk about it. We've already decided it. There is no public process. It's fast. It lasts only 11 months. I know all the other processes are requiring intervention. Ours does the same, which of course it's like a pay to play structure, right? You have to pay it in order to intervene. It gives conditional approval to the developer, and with that conditional approval, it automatically grants limited authority for eminent domain. So just like I heard, I think that is the same kind of a process that I think South Dakota has, right? So limited voice to local governments. The landowners really don't have the chance to speak up. You've got the local governments who are representing all things related to infrastructure, public health, safety, and the economy, and that's pretty much it. And it gives a lot of voice to the state agencies who say, this is going to be great for our economy. It's the best thing we've got since apple pie, which of course doesn't apply. It's great for energy security. This is the bill we're working with. Of course, that doesn't apply. So what we ended up doing right after Navigator intervened, we've got a little bit of a different model than I've heard other states share. We formed a nonprofit that allows group representation for landowners, and we've actually expanded it as well for counties. So this nonprofit allows the fees to be collected to hire an attorney. We have a super attorney, Joe Murphy Meyer Capel out of Champaign, who's working with us. And we have 5 board members, articles of incorporation, bylaws, etc. And we decided we would only charge $500, not 50, excuse me, a year, which so far has worked pretty well for us, as we have about 200 members right now. And that will pay for all the things you see here. The nonprofit holds member meetings, it elects officers, and it provides a streamlined way for our attorney to work with a smaller board to do what they all need to do together for representation. And we're going to use the same process for ADM. So consistent with what I've heard from everybody else, organize some more, sleep about organizing, dream about organizing, and don't take Saturdays and Sundays off without organizing. That kind of describes where we've been. We started out with no mailing lists whatsoever. We had to compile all of that and really had no landowners. So what we have found has been effective is holding webinars that can be used to collect data from people. What county are you in? Get their email addresses and begin to connect with them, which has been fairly useful. But it's also helped all of our members grow and understand the complexities and understand maybe why Illinois is such a hotbed for carbon capture and sequestration, and understand what it is we need to do to work together to stop this. And it's really helped lead us to the legislation I'm going to talk about in a minute. And oh, by the way, I should also say that growing our list, growing our mailing, we follow Jessica's lead, and we're holding weekly Thursday night organizing meetings, which has really helped solidify our footprints in all the counties that we're working in. And of course, public presentations. But I'm pointing out this one because This one was done in a 3-county area. We had over 200 people show up and some elected officials as well. So while we will go anywhere, anytime to hold a presentation, this one was really effective. So where are we? We're about 6 months behind everybody else. We got started later. Our timeline's a little bit different. And we still have moved forward with, I can't count, 19 adopted resolutions, I think, and moratoriums. We were hoping that more counties, and I still think some would be willing to adopt a 2-year moratorium that's tied into PHMSA's regulations, or rulemaking process, or until they got zoning underway. Zoning has not been a key organizing tool. I thought it would be. Christian County is moving forward with a full sequestration and pipeline ordinance. The other counties that have shown interest are sort of saying, let's see what happens. And now we're going to be doing some of that work with our statewide legislation. Again, you can see the petitions that we have here, and we're showing those up and expanding it for the next go around. One of the things that's different is we were able to work with the Illinois Farm Bureau and did a pretty darn good job of getting a resolution that would have supported a moratorium for CO2 pipelines by the Illinois Farm Bureau, who wields great power here in Illinois. And it turned out to be a 40-60% vote not in our favor. But we're going to keep at that, because I think if we can get the Farm Bureau on board, we have a greater opportunity to win. Like others, we are encouraging comments to be posted on the ICC website, especially to counter the influx of carbon capture is good for Illinois that I imagine all of you have seen by Navigator that began to flood this website. We're doing it again with a new docket number that has just been released. One of the things we did to counter Navigator's carbon capture is good for Illinois, which I realized was not just going to the ICC's website, but also is going to our governor. It was also going to our U.S. Congress woman, U.S. Representative and Senator Durbin, U.S. Senator, and our state legislators. We decided we better start changing the narrative and make sure we had that greater reach as well. So we did that, in addition to all the other things that we talked about, signs and mailings and all the organizing tactics that I think are pretty common to everything. But now we feel like, my gosh, there's only so much we can do at that county level, right? And it was time to get going for state organizing. So here in Illinois, we have a great coalition, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, that has great, great power and legislative expertise. It's taken a while to get them to buy into the fact that we needed to move on and we needed to do it now. And you're going to be surprised to hear that the safety moratorium on carbon dioxide pipelines and the carbon dioxide Transport and Storage Protections Act were really written in less than 1 month's time. And the second bill is really super comprehensive. I'm going to go through that a little bit, but it took that long time to get everybody to say, yes, there's a need. Yes, there's a need. Yes, there's a need. And the reason for that is because there's so much implementation that needs to be done to get, move forward with the bill that we actually did pass, that has huge workforce development components and environmental justice parts. So our safety moratorium is pretty simple. It's just going to stop the approval and the construction of all CO2 pipelines for up to 2 years, or until PHMSA's rulemaking process is finished, whichever comes first. We're considering another bill that might put the whole thing on hold and put a moratorium on everything, the whole 3-part system. That's in discussion now after talking to some key legislators in Springfield. So the second bill, the larger bill, captures all 3 components. And what I think is really important to highlight here is that we've set this up as an EIS process, where we're looking at purpose and need, identification of impacts, analysis of alternatives, and public participation. Lots and lots and lots of public participation, which we all feel is so important when you're talking about such risky endeavors. We also would require a life cycle analysis of a project, cradle to grave, And we would require that the project would be actually net carbon negative, but also require the developer and operator to compare that to other alternatives that could be deployed with less harm to achieve the same emissions reductions. Pore space in this bill is owned by the surface owner, and it requires 100% of the landowners to agree to a sequestration project before it goes forward. And the developer, not the owner of the surface, is liable for the CO2. The US EPA requires a post-closure long-term care monitoring, et cetera, for 50 years. We're going to do this for 100 years because it takes that long for CO2 to stop moving around. We also have key components for CO2 pipelines that take care of a lot of the problems I just discussed. Hooray, we're going to have an evaluation of purpose and need. Hey, we're going to have some public participation before even filing with the ICC. You know, developer, you have to go meet in every single county, and you have to bring maps and bring along your emergency preparedness plans. You have to do a submittal of a list of occupied buildings and uses to local governments so they can begin to prepare and they know where, you know, how they will be impacted. And you have to also coordinate with those local governments with respect to roads, emergency preparedness, and zoning and setbacks, all before you file. This bill eliminates eminent domain altogether. It does, as I heard Chase describe, you know, we're looking at setbacks. Ours are beginning at a mile, and it does provide that process for a developer to show lesser setbacks via the computer dynamic modeling we've all talked about in our separate quarters, I'm sure. It has a fund for emergency preparedness, training, and equipment, and it eliminates that conditional approval process that currently exists. Right now, Navigator could get approval and they could begin to do eminent domain without having all their other state and federal permits in place. That's gone. And so this last slide is intended to show you where we're at. We think we're at ground zero, and that's not to diminish anything that anybody else is doing. I don't mean that, but it's like every day I get up, it's like, oh, there's one more project, one more county, one more whatever that we're having to deal with. Some of this is not ethanol, some of this is coal, some of this is not far along yet, but we do have, for example, carbon capture going on in an AJ community in Springfield. That's happening. We do have carbon sequestration all the way down the right column there. That's already in process. Some of it we don't know what's happening. Navigator is being closed mouths. Some of the counties, like Logan County, isn't telling us what's going on, and it's really frustrating because we know they're out there signing, getting landowners to sign up with easements in places we haven't been able to get to yet. So we need this legislation, and we need it like yesterday. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for your time. And people in Illinois who are here tonight are active, and they have learned to be organizers, and they are learning to be working on legislation, and nobody wanted those skills a year ago, right? So thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks so much. And a reminder, we'll be sending out an email to all the folks who attended tonight with the contact info for all of these folks and links to their websites and whatnot. So without any further ado, let's move on to Minnesota. We hear from Maggie from CARE.
Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna put a timer on and share my screen, hopefully. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Schubert. I am campaigns director at CURE in Minnesota. And yeah, I first just wanted to start with a little bit of context setting about where Minnesota is within, the context of these projects. We are also looking at two of them out of the three sort of pipeline networks that we're looking at in the Midwest. And Summit's Midwest Carbon Express is the one where we are currently looking at the largest footprint with over or with almost 240 miles of pipeline. They have started the application process, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but so far it is the application process for this most northern leg. Minnesota is somewhat unique in that we're not currently a crossover state, so we just have all of these legs coming into the state. Navigator so far has only about 15 miles of pipeline in the state, though I will note that there are a large number of ethanol and other kinds of facilities that are still unaccounted for, including Poet ethanol and biorefining facilities, which is, as folks in other states know, Navigator has signed up with Poet otherwise, and so we're sort of waiting to see what happens there. Thus far, they haven't officially filed an application, though just I think it was this month they opened a docket at the PUC. So we are expecting to see something from them any day now, and are waiting with bated breath. And I should say, you know, sort of why CURE was sort of initially brought into this pipeline fight is that we are a 30+ year organization that is based in rural Minnesota, where my pointer is where our office is, and where most of our staff are in the southwestern corner of the state. And so these pipeline projects currently are very much in our backyard. And that's sort of what initially brought us into it, and why we were even sort of aware that this was happening, I think, before anyone else in the state, is because we were literally seeing it happen in the places where a lot of our staff and our members actually live. So I just wanted to say a little bit about how we are approaching this work. You know, as Mark said, our acronym CURE stands for Clean Up the River Environment, which sort of, I think, gives a particular perception of the organization, but we see ourselves less as, you know, a conservation oriented or environmental organization. And you know, these days we are very much a climate and environment and energy democracy organization. And that's really sort of foundational to how we approach this work. This work is very much, as we say here, about changing the decision-making process around these pipelines. And we would say around the quote unquote clean energy transition overall, right? That these pipelines are emblematic of a clean energy transition that is prioritizing corporate profits over the well-being of folks in communities that are going to be directly impacted by them. And so it's really important to us that whether it be these pipelines or other, you know, projects within the sphere, that this decision-making process is changed, so that the health concerns and values of the people that call these places home are part of that process. So what does that look like? Like everyone else here, we take a multi-pronged approach to this work. And also, like everyone here, those prongs work together in ways, you know, it's supposed to be a synergetic strategy. So, you know, starting with the community and landowner organizing work that we're doing, you know, the first thing that I'll mention is that Minnesota is an outlier in that we do not have eminent domain authority for carbon dioxide pipelines currently. There is the potential for that to change in various ways, but currently the situation is that is not really on the table for the companies. So that's, you know, as I'll talk about more, that's not a focus for us at the legislature. It's also not something that we are able to use to mobilize folks. So it is, you know, less a part of our conversation with folks that they need to be worried about eminent domain and sort of thinking about how they can protect themselves from that. But otherwise, I would say, you know, the conversations that we have with folks on the ground is very similar to that folks are talking about in other states. You know, we really focus on making sure that people are aware of the health and safety and local impacts of these projects. You know, we also are very concerned and want people to know about how these companies, that are presenting themselves as friends to rural communities and potentially saviors to rural communities, that they are actually engaged in very aggressive and manipulative tactics, as Jessica talked about, and others have talked about the lawsuits that they're bringing in other states. We haven't seen that yet, but we are certainly seeing, a lot of misinformation spread about what the benefits will be, questionable assertions about how many easements have been signed. And so that's a lot of our work too, sort of diligent tracking of the easements so that we can say authoritatively that the situation is not necessarily as the companies are presenting it. And also, the targeting of vulnerable folks in terms and pressuring them to sign contracts. And so making sure that folks are aware of that on the ground, but also making sure that our Attorney General is aware of it. So that is also something that a conversation that we're engaged in right now. And then the final thing that I will talk about is, the work that we're doing on the ground is very much about working with folks to kick in the doors of a regulatory process, because as I said before, the places where the decisions are made about these kinds of projects are not typically very welcoming or opening to folks on the ground. And so making sure that those avenues are there for people to get engaged and then helping them get engaged has been an enormous part of our efforts over the past year, 15 months. So moving on to what's happening in the regulatory and legal environment, I will say those efforts to bring people into the regulatory process has thus far been pretty successful for us. We have really sort of changed the terrain around the regulatory terrain around these projects. Over a year ago, as this, article headline says, we had a quote unquote regulatory black hole. We had no state agencies who really saw themselves as having authority over those pipelines. And through a series of steps and interventions that we've taken over the past year, we are now in a situation where we were recently granted an environmental impact statement review for Summit's project. Which is, the most robust kind of environmental review that we have at the state, and Minnesota is somewhat lucky to have relatively strong environmental laws and environmental review process laws, and so we've been able to utilize that. I will also say our hope is this is really important and a big win for us here in Minnesota, but we also hope that it is something that benefits the movement writ large, because, as I think we've heard from folks in other states, the regulatory processes do not allow a lot of public engagement. They're not going to allow for a lot of robust analysis. And so we're really hoping that the process that we have here can really, will be one of the strongest challenges and most robust analysis that we'll get on these early projects, certainly at the state level, and who knows, maybe even at the federal level, depending on how things go, as Pamela alluded to with, say, the Army Corps or other things. So so I would, among other things, say this is a little bit of a pitch that we're going to need a lot of support if we are going to be able to bring the sort of expert analysis to these, sort of the legal arguments. We are lucky to have a lawyer on staff. Being a small staff, we've also gotten some really excellent support from organizations like the Public Employee for Environmental Responsibility and also the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. They've been really great partners, but this is an extended and in-depth process. And so we're going to be needing support on that. So you'll be hearing from us on that, hopefully. And that process also involves, as it says here in the slide, some hearings before an environmental law judge. And so that's another part of the process that I think brings some, additional opportunities for participation and also engagement and transparency to these projects. So yes, that's the regulatory process. Moving on to the legislative situation. Oh, and I'm already at 10 minutes, so I'm going to speed this along. So I think one thing to note about Minnesota, again, we are a little bit of an outlier other than, say, Illinois, in that we are somewhat surprisingly in November became a democratically controlled state. And so I think that that sets up, in addition to the fact that we don't have eminent domain, the fact that we are a DFL trifecta is a particular legislative context. And one of the things that we saw, and we are in the middle of our legislative session right now. And so one thing that I saw that maybe folks don't really think of as being relevant to this fight over carbon capture and these pipelines is that Minnesota passed 100% carbon-free bill. And this was a huge success, and CURE was involved with the broad coalition that got this passed, and we celebrate that. It is pretty important climate legislation. That being said, it is also, if you're concerned about carbon capture, how we define carbon-free in Minnesota remains largely undefined. And so I would say this is going to be deeply contested territory. Contested because it is not a lost battle. I think there's a big opportunity to ensure that carbon-free in Minnesota means not reliant on just simply, quote unquote, cleaner fossil fuel or other polluting industry future, that it is something that is actually sort of phasing out those industries. But that's going to be, that is a huge part of sort of the educational work that we're doing right now at the legislature is conversations around that and making sure people are aware about the distinction between what a carbon-free future is and, say, a net carbon-free future is. And just as a little indication, this, we had a version of this introduced as an amendment to that 100% bill that did not get picked up. And this has also been introduced as a standalone bill in the House. We don't expect this particularly to go forward just for various political reasons, but I think it is an indication of the kind of arguments that we'll see if you are committed to a quote unquote carbon-free future and you consider carbon capture to be a viable carbon emissions reduction strategy, then I think these are the kinds of things that we'll see to sort of see this be incorporated into Minnesota and other states that are moving towards 100% clean energy. These kinds of pro carbon capture and sequestration bills, which then, of course, facilitate the development of pipelines. The other thing I'll just mention, this is a pretty sad looking slide. I apologize for that. And that's because I was just in meetings today and we heard that Minnesota's low carbon fuel standard is going to be introduced probably tomorrow and get a hearing this week. So that is moving very fast. I'll say we have reasons to be concerned about a low carbon fuel standard for all sorts of reasons, but including the fact that whether or not you think they will actually be an economic incentive for these pipelines, we know that low carbon fuel standards is what is being used to sell it to ethanol facilities and as a result corn producing communities. So we're concerned about that. We are also concerned about, even though there are attempts to limit the way that credits can be generated for enhanced oil recovery, we don't think that those are adequate or enforceable. So that is a very quick overview of what's going on with that. So if there are questions, happy to answer them. But the last thing I want to mention, just on a somewhat happier note, it is some legislation that is moving through right now, which is not specific to the carbon pipelines, but will be very relevant. Which is some pretty strong and exciting environmental justice legislation. This in the form of the Frontline Community Protection Act. It is also what folks in other states call cumulative impacts analysis bill, and it would more or less prohibit the permitting and expansion of, it would prohibit the permitting of new and expanded permits for projects in environmental justice communities that would bring additional pollution and environmental harms to those communities. And we know that the number of the facilities that are involved with these projects, not all of them, but they are in environmental justice communities. And so this will have an impact on this particular issue of the carbon pipelines, among other things. And it is just generally pretty exciting work. And I think just to close out, say where we hope to be developing, if we are developing a policy agenda around these pipelines, we are, looking to do that in coalition with our environmental justice and indigenous rights and sovereignty, oriented organizations and movements, because that is where we see some of the most exciting opportunities to really change the way that we make decisions about these pipelines and a whole host of other problematic projects. And I will stop talking. Thanks. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Maggie. We're going to hold questions till the end here. Moving right along, come back to my home state of Nebraska, and let's hear from Shelly Meyer. She is a actual landowner on the route and an organizer with the Nebraska Easement Action Team. Take it away, Shelly.
Yes, I'll make this really quick so we can get to questions. But yes, my family ground is in Dixon County, Nebraska, way northeast corner. As of last week, it's 99 years in my family. So as you might think, I'm going to go down fighting to make sure that nothing happens to it. My father received the packet a couple of days before Christmas in December of 21. Nice Merry Christmas present that was. So it's very, very sad, the look on his face when all he saw in the letter was eminent domain. So he obviously thinks that his ground is going to be taken from him and my mom. So that's my relationship to this whole thing. And that's why I'm so passionate about this as well. Along with working with this group has just been very wonderful for me, even though I'm not happy to have to be in this group, but I will fight till the end. We have been working through some county commissioner meetings. We've went to eight counties so far. We've been going through the carbon pipeline risk guidebook and going through some of the most important things that a county commissioner group, a board or supervisor group can do. And Jane basically goes through the list. It's in the book regarding, you can make changes to routing, you can have construction mitigation pieces in an ordinance, you can have depth of the pipelines, emergency response and safety items, which is very, very important, as you've heard from everyone else. And what happens if it's abandoned? What if the project's abandoned and this thing is in the ground? What are you going to do with that? So wind farms have that. Why doesn't this? So those are the top things that we talked to them about. We have 4 more that we are going to do between March and May. I'm getting those scheduled now, working with those county clerks to get those on the agenda. And we usually like to have at least 15 minutes. There have been a couple that have went longer than that because landowners do show up when they see that Bold, Nebraska is on the agenda, and they do come and they do say their piece as well. So it's great to see the landowners attend those as well. So it's really nice. We do have 3 upcoming meetings for the Nebraska Easement Action Team in Bold. The first one's in York, the 6th, and second one is in O'Neill on the 14th of March. And the third is in Norfolk area, Norfolk, Nebraska, that's March 22nd. So we're gonna have hopefully large turnouts in those areas because they're all greatly distributed there with all the different counties in those locations. Those are mainly affected, those are mainly affected with the Summit and Navigator, where we have the Trailblazer pipeline that's converting natural gas to CO2. So that's a kind of a unique situation in southern part of the state. So that's kind of where we are now. Jane is actively trying to work with senators regarding eminent domain and trying to get something taken care of there on the legislation. She's still trying to make that happen this session. She's working diligently. She's always on go and always on the phone. So I really respect her for what she's doing. And we don't really expect anything major in state regulations or by the public service commission until there's some kind of lawsuit or something like that might happen in Nebraska. But thus far, we're just trying to tell people don't sign, even though they've been getting the same harassment I'm on my third or fourth agent. Somebody tells me, they keep harassing me, keep calling for surveys, keep offering more money. Like some, it's on their fourth round of money increases. So it's, we're still saying, don't sign anything and follow these other states of what we're doing. I follow you all the time. And I tell everybody I know what is going on. Just because we don't have something going on in Nebraska doesn't mean nothing's happening. We're diligently working. So that's all I had for an update.
Thanks so much, Shelley, and thanks for your work and your dedication, your family's efforts. I know it's, working with all the folks, landowners on the Keystone XL pipeline, which was Bold, Nebraska's reason for coming. Well, not the reason that we became as big as we did, was all the landowners
Right.
were opposed to it, and just trying to hear them and represent them and help amplify their voices. So thank you very much.
And my cousin has both of them going through his property.
Yeah. As Shelley mentioned, Nebraska is a little bit unique from these other states in that the Nebraska Public Service Commission does not have any authority whatsoever, and they've said this on carbon dioxide pipelines. So Nebraska has no authority whatsoever to make any kind of decision. It will be up to counties themselves, whether they put any kind of regulations, conditional use permits, setbacks, etc., which is all very within their authority to do, and the negotiations with landowners themselves. There'll be no one else stepping in to have any hearings or comments or listen to the public at all. It'll be you talking to your land agent, unfortunately. So we're really trying to, put up a front here and make sure that there's folks who are working for landowners, and that's what's in Bold's purview and the purview of all these groups that are here tonight. So there's actually one more CO2 pipeline in Nebraska. Is a Bridgeport that's going to connect to a local ethanol plant. It'll be a small pipeline, but it's just another thing. We're looking at sequestration potentially in western Nebraska, so we've got our eyes peeled on that. That's one of the other things I wanted to mention. Unfortunately, we had to have two of our panelists leave us. They have work-related stuff happening at this hour, and totally appreciate Chase and Elliot from North South Dakota for joining us. We're going to try in these last couple of minutes here to get to a couple of your questions. A bunch of folks have put some in the chat. Some of our panelists have gone and replied to those answers in the chat, but I'm going to try and take a couple of these questions here with the last couple of minutes we have. Let's see, going up to the top here. We have the dates of the North Dakota figured out. Is there an assurance angle, liability coverage to pursue given the Mississippi Satartia CO2 pipeline explosion in 2020? Is insurance coverage set at the state or federal level? Michael asks. I'm going to probably ask Paul Blackburn, our attorney, to jump in on that one.
Sure. As a general rule, the federal government doesn't have any insurance requirements for these pipelines, not at all. Iowa, for its pipelines, has a bonding requirement, but it's not an insurance requirement. And otherwise, none of the other states have insurance requirements. Now, the Minnesota Public Utility Commission and for its oil pipelines hasn't required that companies have insurance. But there are no requirements for that. That was just something that the Public Utility Commission in Minnesota decided to do. There's no reason why Public Utility Commission or Public Service Commissions or utility boards couldn't impose insurance requirements. I believe they did for DAPL in Iowa too, but most states could impose insurance requirements. And in theory, I should also say that counties could impose insurance requirements too, in many states.
Good question. Let's see here. Someone's asking about Amory for a description of graphics of how carbon is captured, transported, and stored. There is a good website that our folks at another associated group have put together. I think it's called carboncapturefacts.org. Somebody has that, can type in the chat. That would be awesome. That has a lot of the good, just kind of like basic 101. And there we go. Thank you, Jessica. That will have a lot of that kind of information for you.
Hey, Mark, I actually pull all the questions out. Let me just walk through what's there because I have them in order, and then it's not all of my, I'm not going to answer all of them, but that way you can just watch through. Okay. The next question that people asked was, will North Dakota PSC make decisions meeting by meeting or one decision at the end of all the meetings? And the answer there is the North Dakota Public Service Commission will have these hearings, and then they'll have a business meeting, which will not have public comment at it. And they'll make a decision in their business meeting. So there'll be one decision at the end of all the public hearings. A question is, where do these pipelines plan to take the CO2? Are they picking CO2 up from many sources all along the route? Where does the CO2 end up? Who determined all these pipelines were needed? We'll talk about the CO2, where it's going. The Summit pipeline is taking the CO2 to middle of North Dakota up to Oliver and Mercer County. And there's two different locations. They have a contract with a carbon capture project at the Milton R. Young plant called Project Tundra. And they're also planning to have their own carbon sequestration wells, probably near the coal mines in Mercer County. But at the same time, that pipeline will end right near the beginning of an existing CO2 pipeline that brings carbon dioxide up through the oil fields in North Dakota. Currently, it goes up to oil fields in Canada. So the CO2 that coming in from Summit could ultimately go to oil fields for use in enhanced oil recovery. And in fact, Summit in its North Dakota Public Service Commission applications admitted that the CO2 could be used for those purposes. It hasn't said that in Iowa, it hasn't said that in South Dakota, but it said that it could be used for oil recovery in North Dakota. In Summit, the Navigator pipeline, I think, as folks have said, it goes down to yet to be determined locations in Illinois, and maybe they'll never have a location in Illinois. I'll just also add that there are legacy oil fields in central Illinois, and so it's inconceivable that they could try to use the CO2 going into Illinois for those oil fields. And one study I read said that the entire capacity of the Navigator pipeline could be used for 10 years straight to get the oil out of what they want out of the ground in Illinois. So the entire capacity of that pipeline would take 10 years to get all the oil out. In reality, it did probably do it over a few decades, but that's that. And who determined all these pipelines were needed? Well, in Illinois, lucky them, the legislature determined that sort of, but it's really up to the public utility commissions, the counties, and other people to determine whether they're needed or not. So at this point, most of them haven't been determined that they're needed, and we're saying that they aren't. See, do the economics of these pipelines depend on the expanded 45Q tax credits? And the answer to that is absolutely they do. The main financial driver for these pipelines is the 45Q tax credit. They were all considered by their developers economically viable before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. And then the Inflation Reduction Act increased the tax credits by 70%. That increase in tax credits is essentially, well, it is pure profit for these pipelines. For all three of them together, that's over $1 billion a year per year in just raw profit, meaning pork barrel giveaway to these companies. These companies are utterly shameless when it comes to ripping off the public. And is there insurance angle? I think we got that. So there's an insurance angle. And then there's a longer set of questions. Are there any joint projects that can be financed across state and that are useful to address real issues with CO2 pipelines or on public good? For example, what is the net CO2 released from these projects cradle to grave? I think that's a great idea. Illinois has that legislation. It should be pushed for the IUB. And if these get pulled out into another legislative session, or there's still states with ongoing legislative sessions, they can certainly try to get a cradle to grave analysis done. And the next question is plume models, which would lead to setback and communications requirements. In Illinois, these are private to the company, not shared. We would very much like to do plume modeling. It doesn't have to be done by the companies. It's entirely possible for pipeline engineers that we hire to figure out how much CO2 would come out, and then to hire our own plume modelers. The big challenge has been finding people who have the capacity to do this plume modeling. And if anybody on this knows folks who are computer modelers, let us know. We're going to continue to look for folks who can do this. The models, a lot of them are in the public domain, so it's not a matter of getting money to pay to use the model. It's a matter of finding people with the expertise, because these are quite sophisticated models. The modeling we'd like to do is called computational fluid dynamic modeling, and it requires a lot of sophisticated data entry into the model to make it work. And our first goal is to reverse engineer the Satartia rupture, because if we can have a model that shows predicts what happened in Satartia and shows that it happened, then we know the model at some level will be somewhat accurate. A lot of the standard models that companies use are grossly inadequate for determining CO2 pipeline ruptures. So if folks have friends who are academics and modelers, please let us know. How phase 1 fixed pipelines and sequestration systems will become obsolete with phase 2 flexible systems. A variety of capture and CO2 is a product for various industries. I think what this question is getting at is what happens when we move into new industries, when they start capturing CO2 from other industries. We know that the ethanol plants produce a relatively pure CO2 stream, but other industries do not. And I think that's one of the big questions that's going to come up with the pipeline that has this Materials Safety Administration in their rulemaking that's supposed to kick off formally next fall, is to have them do standards for the qualities and the standards for the CO2 that are in the pipelines. Because right now there's no standardized quality for the CO2. And yet it's critically important, because even very small amounts of contaminants can either damage the pipe steel itself, or can change the operational characteristics of the pipeline dramatically. We know that in test ruptures in Italy, a 24-inch pipeline changing the composition of the CO2 stream by 2%. In other words, adding 2% more nitrogen to the CO2 stream resulted in the pipeline blowing itself up in it's called a running ductile fracture, and blasting a trench 20 feet deep, 10 feet deep, because they added 2% more nitrogen. So very small changes in the CO2 composition, and these pipelines can have dramatic impacts on the safety and reliability of these pipelines. And there's currently no standards for them whatsoever. And I think that's what I've got, but no more questions have popped up. And sorry for talking a lot, but I thought we'd just get through them and help people get the answers quickly.
Thanks, Paul. Very much appreciate that. We're a little bit over time here. I think we're going to call that on questions, although I will say that we have them in the Q&A here. And if there's a couple that we didn't get to, we're going to try and put them on the page for the webinar, which we'll be putting up on YouTube and then getting out to everyone on email tomorrow. So if we didn't get your question, apologies, but we will try and do that on the website tomorrow. So with that, thanks again to all of our panelists who showed up. Sorry for the folks who had to leave a little bit early. They were very happy that you joined us as well. And we are very excited. Next month's Pipeline Fires Hub webinar is going to delve even deeper into carbon capture and storage, but this time with our comrades who are working to fight this down in Cancer Alley in the Gulf region. Big build out plan down there as well. So with that, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next month.